Good evening. I'm Brandy Ellison, Associate Director of New Morning Foundation. The foundation is a South Carolina-based nonprofit committed to improving access to reproductive health education, counseling, and clinical services for South Carolinians ages 30 and younger. We accomplish this through strategic grant making and our public policy initiatives. Tell Them is the foundation's grassroots advocacy network. Tell Them brings together over 12,000 constituent members who support responsible reproductive health policy making. On the behalf of the foundation and Tell Them, I'd like to welcome you to the first event in our local forum series. I'd also like to thank event sponsors Little Steps and ThinkTwice.org. I'm delighted to now introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Ms. Jacquelyn Clement. Jacquelyn is a business and political consultant at EYC consulting firm, as well as a community activist. Ms. Clement is currently enrolled in Limestone College, working towards a bachelor's degree in business administration. Ms. Clement is an active member of her community and believes that all young people should be empowered to make positive life decisions. Ms. Clement.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're not going to make this too formal, and I want everybody to feel comfortable, and once we allow the audience to ask questions, please do so. I want to thank you for joining us for our South Carolina Sex Ed Problem Local Forum series. Tonight's event brings together experts from your own community to discuss an issue that has far-reaching effects on our state: reproductive health education. Sexual health education is an important part of a young person's curriculum and teaches young people to make healthy and smart decisions. Recently, New Morning Foundation released a report which examined all of South Carolina's 85 school districts and how they were teaching reproductive health education to our kids. The findings show that our kids are not getting the important, medically accurate facts about reproductive health. Their teachers are not fully trained to teach this information, and the school districts are not being held accountable for how they teach this information. In a subject area as basic and necessary as health education, our children are lagging behind. This is evident in the appalling rates of teen pregnancies and STD rates in our state, now ranked 12th highest in the nation in teen pregnancy. South Carolina is also ranked 3rd highest in gonorrhea and syphilis cases in teens. Our state spends nearly $200 million a year on the repercussions of teen pregnancy. The concept of don't talk about it and just say no apparently isn't working. If our laws and procedures allow for the restriction of information or censor what a teacher can say, then we're not only teaching our children incorrect information, we are instilling a lifetime of potentially dangerous behaviors. Tonight, we'll look at this issue from the parent's perspective. We have gathered 4 phenomenal panelists who will answer questions from their perspectives, both professionally and personally, about the importance of comprehensive reproductive health programs that offer students information about disease and pregnancy prevention, including abstinence. As we discuss these issues, we invite you to join us, both here in the audience and with the microphone we have provided, and also at home. If you have a Twitter account, please hashtag #ReformSexEd. Also, if you're on Facebook, please go to our Facebook page, tellthem.org, tellthemsouthcarolina.org. Healthy families are those in which parents and children talk openly and honestly about important life issues, including sex. Unfortunately, there are many children in different situations who never receive adequate or accurate reproductive health information at home. Since they do not get the information and skills training they need to navigate adolescence and become healthy adults, these young people are at greatest risk for unintended pregnancy, STIs, and HIV. With that, let's meet our panel. I'll have each one of them quickly introduce themselves and give us a quick bio on what they do and why they're here tonight. Dr. Holmes?
My name is Dr. Melisa Holmes. I am an OBGYN, a mother of 3, and I'm the co-founder of Girlology and Guyology, which are companies that are devoted to improving communication in families around healthy sexuality. We do parent-child programs and programs for parents as well.
My name is Traci Fant. I'm CEO of ThinkTwice.org. I have 4 children. ThinkTwice.org raises awareness to the issues of bullying, domestic violence, and violence in the community. I'm very happy to be here, and I think that this is a very important subject that we need to discuss.
Hi, I'm Mandy Black. I'm the executive director and founder of Little Steps, and we work here locally in Greenville County with teen parents.
Good evening. I'm David Mitchell. I'm president and owner of Talent Management Solutions. That's a local professional placement and staffing firm here in Greenville. I have 2 daughters. Both are in college. One is a sophomore at the University of South Carolina. The other is at ECPI studying nursing. And I'm very interested in the process of focusing on teen pregnancy and helping others get past what I was able to get past a pregnant teen in high school. So we're very excited about this opportunity to be here tonight.
All righty. The first question is, students are already overloaded with homework and course requirements. Why should reproductive health education be a priority? Dr. Holmes?
You start with me?
Yeah, because you're close. See?
Well, it has to be a priority because they're just not getting the information, first of all. And every child has a social life, and most children have a social life that leads to a romantic relationship. So helping guide them to make healthy decisions is critical. We teach them safety. We teach them, how to communicate with people. We teach them character education. And to ignore sex and sexuality as part of their education is really doing a disservice and puts them, growing up without critical information for their health and their relationships in the future.
All right. How about you, Traci?
Well, as she said, it is very crucial. A lot of children start dating as young as the age of 12 years old. Some even dating, their parents don't even realize that they're dating. A lot of kids are already sexually active before they are even introduced to sex education. And so it's very important. In fact, it's important for even a household where you may have a parent who is skeptical about when to talk to their child. Any type of education that can help you with your life skills is a very important resource for anyone to have, and sex education is basically a life skill education format.
Thank you. I'd like to insert a statistic because Traci kind of touched on it. 20% of our middle school children are sexually active. 20% of our middle school children are sexually active and have had sexual intercourse. That is extremely disturbing to me, and I'm sure it's disturbing to a lot of you as well as our viewers out there and our friends on Facebook and Twitter. And I think we're at least starting the process to help correct these things by having this forum and this series and bringing about dialogue that hopefully will bring about change. But we cannot let this be the first and only conversation we have. We need to go home and talk about it. We need to talk about it with our neighbors, our church members, other parents, and get more involved in our schools. But tonight can't be the end of this conversation. It must be ongoing. Ms. Black, why do you think it should be a priority in our schools?
I think obviously as the things that they have mentioned, but also in the reference of life skills, it's one of the life skills that really, if they don't have that, that can affect all of the other things that we're trying to teach them. So if we're trying to teach them about subjects in school that we think are very important, if they don't get this lesson in with that, then that can change the trajectory of them being able to successfully graduate high school. So we want to make sure that they are able to complete that and make use of the subjects that they are learning about. So without the sex education piece, I think that can cause problems with them for other things down the road.
Well, you said something about high school and dropout rates and graduation. So again, I like numbers, so I may just interject stats here and there. Greenville County has teen birth rates from age 15 to 19 of 3%. We have 21% of our children living in poverty, and we have a 12% high school dropout rate. South Carolina has 4% teen birth rates from ages 15 to 19. South Carolina as a state has 24% of their children living in poverty, and South Carolina has a 16% high school dropout rate. The United States has a 3% teen birth rate, 15 to 19. The United States has children living in poverty, 22% of their children are living in poverty, and 7% of their children drop out of high school. So as you can see, our high school dropout rates are much higher than that of the rest of the nation. Okay. David, why do you think it's important that we have reproductive health education?
I feel it's important that we have reproductive health education in schools throughout. And, you know, I'm quite sure this question will come up at what point should it begin, but it certainly should begin in the education process no later than middle school. You gave the statistics on the number of young people in middle school having sex. Sex education is important because sex is a life experience. We learn about life experiences in school. We learn sociology, mathematics, government and economics. Those are academic issues, but also you have socialization, and with socialization becomes friendships, and with friendships become love affairs, or what kids think may be love affairs, or what have you, and with that they tend to associate that thing called sex with that. So what happens is, and I believe that number is 20%, because all of those things begin to connect. My socialization, my friendship, my love affair, now we get to this thing of sex. And I don't know what to do here. All I know is my friends have told me they've done it and we've done it, and I think we should do it. So if you're not educated in that fact of what the repercussions are from that relationship, then that relates to the number of 20% and the impact that it has on young people, not only in their middle school years, but throughout their entire lives.
So, to piggyback on that, so you do feel it's necessary, do you feel it's necessary for all students to take some form of age-appropriate sex ed?
Certainly I do. And again, that was the great debate. Where does it start? But being a former educator, only in it for a short period of time in my career, I understood that relationships and interactions between young people tend to go to that level. We don't hear about it as teachers or parents because kids, the date back then in the 90s, we didn't have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these other things. So they even have more devices to interact with each other and have these discussions. Back in the day when I was young, it was that we know mom will get home at 5 o'clock, so we better get it done before 5 o'clock. So our issue was that now kids can conveniently communicate where we would meet, where would we go, and that type of thing. So to answer your question, yes, I think there is definitely a part of the discussion that needs to say, yes, we must have age-appropriate sex education in the schools.
Please do, Dr. Holmes.
I would love to add to that because, you know, we like to think that middle school is the time when we should start talking to kids formally about sex education, but really it's got to start as soon as they're born. We are sexual beings from the time we are born, and as a child learns the proper names for their anatomy, and they learn what's appropriate touch and what's not appropriate touch, they get empowered with tools that can help prevent sexual abuse. If we can't start these conversations when they're young, the conversations become more difficult as they age. But if you start when they're young, it's a natural flow of dialogue. So there are so many topics to cover with comprehensive sex ed. It should really start in kindergarten when kids start school and at home before that. Child sexual abuse prevention, we know that kids who are informed about sex and they're informed that you don't keep secrets with adults, there are certain points they need to know. We know that those kids usually aren't victimized by child predators because they have a little too much information and that predator doesn't feel safe with them. So starting younger is really critical. The other point I'd like to make is if 20% of kids are sexually active in middle school, obviously we have to start sex ed younger than that as well. So addressing puberty with them when they're in 3rd and 4th grade becomes important because it makes them comfortable talking about it. And then when they move to middle school and start talking about the more difficult conversations, it's a much easier job and they handle it better and they're ready to hear it.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes.
And also,
Traci.
just like she said, I mean, what she's saying is true. The other day, we took my granddaughter to the circus, and it was time to go to the potty. And so we went to the bathroom, and the little boys were in there with their mothers. And she said, "Why are boys in the girls' bathroom?" She was really confused about that. So I explained to her that because they were small, they had to go to their mommies. So then she said, "Well, do we go to the boys' bathroom?" So even, then she even realized then that it's two different things going on, so she even had questions about it at only 4 years old. And so I think that when your child starts to express curiosity about, sex, even when you find that they're looking on the internet or watching certain inappropriate movies or different things like that, it's time to open up that dialogue then instead of trying to avoid it and shun it, because if we make them feel like it's an embarrassing conversation or it's something embarrassing, then they'll be more standoffish about doing it, and then they, begin to sneak into it. And like David said, all other kind of things happen, so.
Thank you.
I think also, just considering how important it is for parents to have these conversations, I think we need to be empowering the parents to have those conversations, because it is true that the more you talk about these things with your children, the less uncomfortable it will be for you and for your child to be able to have an open dialogue about sex and sexuality and what their relationships are. And I think in regards to the school aspect and where we come in with teaching children and trying to teach them all the same thing, I think it's especially important to consider, because not every parent is talking to their child. And just because I talk to my sons about things like this and that my husband does also, that doesn't mean that their peers are having these conversations with them. And we want them to all be informed, and we want their peers to be informed in the same kind of way. So I think that's especially important to give a consistent message.
I think I'm very inclined with Dr. Holmes' explanation of starting much younger. I don't know when it went to 20% in middle school, but I wouldn't begin to know as a parent when my child was in the 3rd grade how to even have that conversation with her about sex, because that's just something that just didn't cross her mind. But kids are exposed today a lot sooner. They see a lot more on TV. They see a lot more on video games and things of that nature. I was watching a video game the other day, a kid play a video game, and the young lady in the video game was dressed very provocative. And I was like, our video games and Pac-Man didn't look like that. So I struggled with that whole perspective. And by the way, she had a gun and she was shooting people. So I'm struggling with the whole process, but it translates to what you just said. If they're seeing that at 4th and 5th grade or 3rd grade even, then perhaps that conversation definitely needs to take place so we can avert that number, 20% having sex in middle school.
Since you brought up having the conversation, or how to have that conversation with a 3rd grader, father speaking to a 3rd grade daughter, how did you have the conversation with your girls? And I'm going to ask each one of you this, so get prepared. Sorry to put you on the spot, but how did it go?
It was uncomfortable. It really, and I had to speak to her from the perspective of a male, because I am a boy. And from a male's perspective, I left it's very difficult for a male to have that conversation with a daughter. First of all, she's not going to talk to her dad about sex, or what have you, or she is extremely uncomfortable until she unwinds. So when I felt like it was an issue, or she began to look at boys a little more than she was watching video games or listen to MySpace and all those things, I began to have that conversation and try to give her perspective on a young man's thought process and what he may be thinking. He may like you and we're friends, and a kiss on the cheek may turn into a kiss on your lips, and how do you deal with that from that perspective? Do you let him know you're not ready for that type of interaction, that physical contact, and that's the kind of conversation I had with her. I left the more detailed situations up to her mother because quite naturally with young ladies, there are different things that happen with their bodies as they begin to mature. So along with that conversation about as she began to go into puberty and began to have menstrual cycles, things of that nature, her mother was able to have those discussions, and that led into more discussions about what happens now if you are involved in a sexual relationship, what are the consequences, and they were able to go into that conversation a little more. So I was able to speak to her from a male perspective as to what little boys may not know and they think they know, as well as what her mother should be able to tell her about her body, the changes that her body was going through.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to something you said. You said she's not going to talk to her dad about sex. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question I want to ask and raise as we go back to my original question is, how do we change that? Because I think that you're right. You're a boy. I'm a girl, and it's easier for girls to talk to their mothers about certain things. But I think, as Dr. Holmes was saying, if we start the dialogue early, it's easier as they get older and the problems get bigger. They don't mind talking to dad or mom because it's not taboo. It's not something that we whisper about or we shun them away if they ask us questions like Traci. Well, actually, Traci, why don't you tell us, pick one of your experiences of talking to your kids about sex and trying to educate them.
Oh, okay. It was, with me, it was a lot easier to talk to my sons about sex than it was my daughter, because I just didn't want to imagine my daughter having sex. You know, I just didn't even want to really, I knew that we had to have that conversation. You know, I just didn't know actually how to approach it because my parents never talked to me about sex. And so the difficulty in that was me doing research and just trying to figure out, you know, okay, it's more to it now than just the birds and the bees. Now it's like, you know, you can't do this and no sexting and this and that and make sure he uses a condom. So all this stuff was going through my mind, and then I'm like, I didn't want her to think that I was saying it's okay to have sex. But then I didn't want her to feel like I'm just talking to the boys about it and totally eliminating the fact that she's also a sexual being. So like with the boys, you know, I just basically, you know, told them, hey, just make sure, don't bring any babies home, you know, use a condom, do this, do that. Let me show you how, you know, to put a condom on, different things like that. With my daughter, it was just like, oh boy, let me see, how are we gonna do this? You know, don't do it, but if you do it, you know, let's go get on the pill. I don't know. Let's talk to her. And then we actually talked to the OBGYN, and the gynecologist actually helped with the discussion because I didn't really know how to talk to my daughter because, no, you know, like I said, my parents didn't talk to me about it.
Right. That's an excellent idea, taking them to the doctor and let the doctor
do
some of the work for you.
It was embarrassing for her. I mean, she's in the audience now. She's probably embarrassed.
I know. I'm looking at her.
It was embarrassing for her, for the gynecologist to talk to her, but it was like a relief off of me because I knew that she was getting a lot of the information. Yeah, because I mean, I didn't find out about sex until I had sex. I was like, oh, okay.
So,
you know.
Back to your boys. So how did they respond to showing them how to put a condom on? And
they laughed and giggled, and you know, and then they got serious when we started looking at condoms and, you know, discussing condoms and different types of diseases. And even with my daughter, I mean, just looking online and showing them different graphic images of sexually transmitted diseases, you know. And with her, you know, of course, talking about teen pregnancy and just different things like that. It just really developing my own open mindset of it. You know, and that's the whole issue. A lot of times as parents, we're not comfortable. The kids are more comfortable than we are sometimes.
Yeah, but they're comfortable with the wrong information a lot of times. That's why we have these terrible statistics here in South Carolina.
Definitely.
Ms. Black, I'm going to end with you, Dr. Holmes. Since
that's interesting that you said that, the wrong information. That was, I love that, David, you're saying talking to them from your perspective, because I think that's so important because you do have a perspective and you do have something to offer them. And I think sometimes we discount that in what our role is. But one of the things I remember my husband saying, I thought, where did that come from? Is he said, you know, you don't want to get information from somebody else because what if they tell you the wrong thing? And I kind of laughed about that. I said, well, where'd you come up with this? But it stuck in my boys' head that they always in the back of their mind were thinking, oh, what if my friend tells me something and it's not true? And then, you know, that planted that seed for them to say, okay, let's have these open conversations. And I think it was interesting for me with my perspective on talking to my sons, especially my older son, that I had him as a teen. I was in my first year of college. So to talk about prevention, I think that was an important conversation to have, but it was a little tricky when you think of that you don't want to put the idea out there that, okay, I wish this hadn't happened, I wouldn't trade him for the world. But at the same time, it was important for him to understand the realities of being a teen parent. And I think that sometimes, especially young parents, will shy away from that because they're afraid, well, what kind of image does this say? You know, I love my boys, but at the same time, I would like for them to make different decisions to not become a teen parent. So in order to make that possible, I think we do have to have the conversations with them, even if it's uncomfortable for us. And I think if you think the conversation's uncomfortable, having a baby in your house would be more uncomfortable. So. And I think, you know, we think about teen pregnancy as the issue also, but when you think of STDs, I think sometimes there are worse things that can happen, you know, for your child to contract AIDS and different things like that. So we definitely want to be having those open conversations with them.
Okay, thank you. Last but certainly
I
not
love this
least.
dialogue because I think that, you know, David, I love hearing that it was really awkward for me to talk to my daughter about sex, but I had a conversation with her. And I think that's important that kids get information from both parents or from an aunt or an uncle, or they get it from both perspectives, because I can't necessarily give my daughters the male perspective, but my husband can do a great job with it. I think that's wonderful. And then I love just the raw honesty that everybody's talking about it was awkward and I didn't really know what to say, but I don't want them to make similar mistakes or make them have the same decisions, have the same hardships. And I think that's what the conversation is about. It's really about thinking what you want for your children. Do you want them, you know, you want them to be healthy, you want them to be safe, and you want them to make the decisions that are best for them at that time of their life. So I think that every parent has a different experience with talking to their kids about sex, and I think every kid gets a different conversation. I know mine did. I have 3 daughters. My daughters are 18, 16, and 7, so I have a big spread. But my oldest daughter is very scientific and detail-oriented, and my talk with her was very scientific and detail-oriented, and her questions were hilarious. Like, well, how does the sperm know exactly which tube to go into to find the egg that came out? And, you know, we have these scientific questions, and then the other daughter tends to be a little more creative, and she just said, do I ever have to do that? And I said, you know, you don't ever have to, but one day you'll want to, and before you do, let's talk some more about it. And that was the end of the conversation. So each kid is going to handle it differently, and I think just knowing your children helps you know how to talk to them. I do think there are different stages that the talk has to happen, and it's not just one talk. You know, there's the whole puberty conversation, which if you catch them before puberty happens, they tend to be kind of excited about it, and they actually look forward to it. If you wait till they're in 6th grade or wait till they have some physical development, they're going to roll their eyes and go, oh, I already know this, don't talk to me about this is embarrassing. But if you catch them before they start developing, they're like looking forward to it and they get excited about it. The same thing happens with the talk about sex. In Girlology and Guyology, parents are going to hate me for saying this, but we say 8 is great for telling them what sex is. That sounds awfully young to a lot of people, but again, if you can be the first person to give them factual information and to give it a positive spin, they're going to carry that with them through the playground and through the locker rooms when they're hearing all the other connotations and negative messages. They're going to hear it from you first and go, no, that's not really the way my mom said it was, or that's not really what my dad said. So I think that if you can catch them on the front end, and every year I get a call from distressed parents with 4th grade children. For some reason it's 4th grade that some kid comes to school and tells everybody what sex is, and it's usually this horrible, you know, oh, there's poking and it's under the covers and it's painful and it's awful and there's this dirty connotation to it. And these 4th grade parents are going, oh my gosh, what do I tell her now? Yeah. And so then you have to do all this backpedaling. Yeah. But if you can catch them on the front end and say, you know what, it's tubes and pipes. This is how it happens. A baby can grow in a uterus. It's really cool. How do you think that, that it gets in there? Well, there's an egg that comes from the mom. There's a sperm that comes from the dad. Those two are required. You can show them how the fetus grows. And then in the end, you can kind of go, and how do you think that sperm gets to the egg? And they're 8. They don't know. I'm not sure. And then you can drop the bomb on them and just tell them exactly. And they kind of go, wow. And then your conversation's over. They're done. They don't want to hear anymore because they've thought about, mommy and daddy did that twice, 3 times. So when they're young, they're very concrete, and that's all they need. But at least they've gotten it from you. And I just think that's a really important way to start, is to, if you can, be the first to get to them with these things. Then the conversations become a little more difficult.
I agree.
If I could just follow up with what Dr. Holmes just shared, because I think it's kind of unique, and I was going to ask that question to the panel as well. Because when kids come to you and ask the question, you got to have the facts. And I think giving them the facts is the key. Some of us saw the Super Bowl commercial on Sunday, and the baby in the back seat asked, I think it's probably about 5 years old. He came with baby Landia and all of these things that babies come from. And it was a legitimate question from a child who had a legitimate, wanted a legitimate answer. And the dad went through this whole scenario about where babies come from. And then when he said, Jimmy said on the park, in the playground, this is, oh, the wheels on the bus go round and round. Well, that's misinformation because at that point is your opportunity to tell the kid the facts. And I think it's probably about 5 years old if we look at the commercial from that perspective. But that happens to American families. And we got to be in the position to answer that question when children come to you and ask you the question, where do babies come from? Because I think that tends to the fact that I understand now as a 5-year-old where babies come from. I'm still going to have a good understanding of it when I'm 8 and when I'm 12 and when I'm 13 and now in the 6th grade. I don't want one of those babies right now because I'm in the 6th grade, and that tends to help them understand. Kids don't need to find out where babies come from when they're 13 years old.
Right.
Okay.
Seeing as how we are in the Bible Belt and we live in very conservative South Carolina, Dr. Holmes, what would be your response to individuals who think teaching kids at any age about sex is encouraging them to be sexually active as opposed to preventing them from making life-altering mistakes?
I think I have 2 responses to that. One is that we actually have the research that tells us that that's really not the case. We have plenty of research out there that tells us that talking to kids about sex does not make them go out and try it. So that's an issue we can just put to rest. We have the science to back us up on that. Where was I going with the other question?
Well, that's the first thing you would tell them, is that the research does not back up.
Oh, yeah. So,
then,
as far as is it okay to talk to kids at any age about sex and being from the Bible Belt and all of that, a lot of us think it's not going to be our kid that this happens to, but it happens to the other kids. And, I like to also engage parents in realizing that if they don't think it's going to be their kid, maybe their kid's a leader, and maybe their kid can be the one who helps their friends. So if you don't need it for your child, maybe your child can help another child understand some facts or understand how to get access to contraception if they need it. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can help our neighbors, even if we believe that we should, that our children say they're going to wait till they're married. We also have the science on that tells us that only about less than 10% of all of America has waited until their wedding night or later for the past 4 generations.
How would you explain all those white gowns?
Think about that. So, we have some interesting information on the reality of when people truly have sex, even 4 generations ago. So I know we don't want to think about our grandparents like that, but less than 10%. So, those are just some facts that I think bring reality into the picture and help us to also realize just that if it's not for us, we can help our friends and neighbors with it.
Okay. We are moving right along here, so I wanted to see if anyone in the audience had any questions or had any feedback, or do any of the parents want to share some of their experiences?
Hi. Is this on? Hello? Okay, great. I wanted to ask, because my son was a very early reader. He embarrassed my entire family at a family event one time. We don't have television in our house. We were at my brother's house, and the Pigs Fly commercial came on, and at the end it says, always wear a condom. And he was about 2.5, and he looked at me and said, Mom, what's a condom? And all eyes were on me. And so I just said, it's just something you put on your penis when you get big. And that's where it stopped, because he was 2.5. He didn't need to know more. So my question is, how can we stop calling this a sex ed problem and start calling it a need for biological information? Because really, we're just teaching science. And he got a book that we found at a store called DNA is Here to Stay. And it talks about the egg, and it talks about the sperm, and it talks a lot about DNA itself. But this was something that we used as a tool in order to kind of show him, well, this is, the sperm comes from the man and the egg comes from the woman. And at 4, he doesn't need to know how it gets in there or anything else. But now that he's 9, we're adding to that conversation. So how can we reframe this and not have it sex education, but have biological information that's being taught all throughout the schools?
What was your name again?
Marnie Schwartz-Hanley. I'm with Stop to Start Foundation, and I do a little disease intervention. I was the condom fairy when I was here at Greenville Tech, handing out condoms to young people because we knew that they had a lack of access to those things. So we're trying to bring in programs where we're trying to reduce them in the Palmetto area of Williamston, Pelzer, West Pelzer. Our teen pregnancy rate is off the charts. And I'm helping the moms that were the teen moms that are now in their 40s to go back to school, to first get their GEDs because they dropped out to have that baby at 16. So how can we stop this generational situation where we have the teen moms, and then we have teens, their teens are having it because their parents didn't talk to them and their parents didn't talk to them. How can we reframe this in more of a biological information instead of making it about sex? Let's make it about biology. We all have that same biology. It's how we all got here. So it shouldn't be a big mystery and be kind of dropped on them in middle school or even, 5th grade or 4th grade. It should be an ongoing conversation, like Dr. Holmes said. How can we facilitate that to where it's more in the curriculum towards a biological information about just how our bodies work? Because we need to know.
It's funny you mentioned that, because right before I came here, I was walking my dog, and my neighbors were out, and a lot of them are teachers. Mm-hmm. So they were asking me, what was I doing? I told them. So this conversation started. And I said, well, tell me about how do they teach it, at your school. And first of all, it's different in all the schools.
All the schools are different.
Your PE teacher may teach about health and physical education, but then a mystery person from the district office comes in and teaches sex ed. And I said, but isn't it just an overall health issue? There's so many things we need to teach them biologically about their bodies, as far as nutrition,
right, absolutely,
and weight gain, and the fact that they need to stay physically active, and the diseases that we can prevent by arming them with the right information. And I think sex ed, like you said, goes with all of that. So I agree. I think that would help to, take some of the edge off of it when you bring it up with schools or whoever, because as soon as you start saying sex and education and children, people freak out. So I think that's an awesome point. Thank you.
I'm wondering, is it the same video that they showed us when we were in 5th grade? Because I remember a gym teacher showed us a video, and it's very old. It's been around for a long time. It may be the same video.
They were going to report back to me tomorrow with some more facts, because I was so disturbed by all of this. It really shook me up. So
I think I said at the beginning, and part of my statement as well, is that sex education should be a life experience, and it should be part of it. We learn about life experiences in school. Mm-hmm. And I truly think that sex is a life experience, and you learn about those life experiences along with the academic experiences while you're in school. I initially said, you probably should start at 6th grade, but with the statistics out there, and the doctor shared with us, you probably should start a little bit earlier, because the numbers validate the fact that we should start earlier. But not only should it start in academia or in school, it should also, and Ms. Clement mentioned the Bible Belt. We need to talk about this in the churches as well. Oh, we don't talk about the churches. Well, I mean, there was plenty of sex in the Bible.
Absolutely.
I mean, Solomon had over 300 wives and 500 concubines. He certainly wasn't sitting there looking at them. David and Bathsheba decided to run off somewhere. So there was a lot of sex going on in the Bible.
And Jesus was born of a teen mom.
Exactly. And with the immaculate, well, we won't get into that level of debate, but the perspective is, if you can discuss it in academia and in the school district, why can't you discuss it in the churches? Pastors have to get to that point where they feel, and children may open up a little more with their Sunday school teacher,
right,
or with their pastor or with their youth leader, as opposed to a teacher, because they have a closer relationship with those individuals. They grew up in the church with those individuals. You have a teacher for 1 year. I don't know if I'm going to open my life up to this particular teacher I've had for 1 year, but if I had the Sunday school teacher or this youth leader that I've known all my life, I may be more comfortable talking to that person as opposed to talking to my parent or a school teacher from that perspective. So it's a life experience.
It totally takes a village, you know.
It does.
Takes a village.
I think that's part of the problem too, is within the schools, it's also just how we as a community look at this issue. If we cannot, as a community, have conversations about it, then how is that going to filter into the schools or the churches, and to bring all these people together to say, you know, whether we want to talk about it or not, it exists. And the kids are getting pregnant. And with over 600 just in Greenville County, I mean, I'm more focused here with Greenville County, but over 600 births to teenagers every year, it's a problem. We're not immune. And I think to say, you know, when you think about the Bible Belt, and I think a lot of people do grab the perspective of, well, my child is in school. And I like the idea that you said about, okay, well, maybe this is to help your child be a leader for somebody else. But even for your child that is very involved in the church and those kind of things, I can say from the perspective, I know there's data to back it up, but for me personally, I was that person that I was very heavily involved in the church youth group. I was a great student. I had great friends. I stayed out of trouble, and I still became a teen parent. So I don't think there is immunity, and if we as parents or as a community sit back and think, okay, our kids are immune to what's going on with this, it's putting blinders over, and that's just furthering the problem.
Well, then how do we teach them refusal skills?
Well, that's where I was going to say, you know, to make this more about biology, it's easy because it is biology, and the plumbing is easy. I mean, we can talk about the biology, but what becomes more difficult are the, what I call the social subtleties of how do you teach kids to make good decisions? How do you teach kids to use the internet responsibly? How do you teach kids to take healthy risks and avoid unhealthy risks and think about them? And those are the things that are brought into comprehensive sex ed programs that are, you know, evidence-based. All of those elements are in these types of sex education programs. So it's an important addition to the biology.
And that
Thank you so much.
you can talk about, I think you can say both things. I don't think kids think of it as you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. They respect that you are giving them information. I certainly don't think that you can, you have to eliminate talking about abstinence just because you talk about things like condoms and safe sex and things like that. You can say at the same time, okay, this is a decision that I hope you will delay, but if you don't, I want you to have the information. And that's just having a responsible conversation.
All righty. Just real quick, I'm going to kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about. First thing, start the dialogue, start it early. Everyone needs to be involved, so the parents, the schools, churches, other organization leaders. I do believe Marnie's point about reforming the school sex ed curriculum and making it, I like David's phrase about life experience, so maybe it's health ed, you know, life experience 101, health ed, nutrition, things of that nature. But we've got to do something, so I think this is a good start. I'm just going to real quick read, this is a Twitter question from @Craven. How do you carefully walk the line between being sex positive and age appropriate regarding sex ed? You want to take that one, Dr. Holmes?
Being sex positive and age appropriate. I think that, again, if you start early, that becomes a lot easier. And there are conversations that even I have trouble with sometimes, and being sex positive, that means, you talk about sexual desire with your kids in middle school because they're feeling new desires and they don't understand how to manage them necessarily in a healthy way. So we have to talk about the difficult topics, but again, reinforce that sex is a good thing in the right relationship. And if we keep that our focus, I think that keeps the sex positive spin on it. And then being age appropriate, you have to decide for each child, what's really appropriate for that child to hear. I have a 7-year-old daughter who got a guinea pig for Christmas and asked me if we could please let the guinea pig keep her uterus and have babies because our dog had been fixed. And she said, what does it mean to be fixed? I said, well, they take out the uterus so they can't have babies. So, 7-year-olds are capable of understanding this, and it's very matter of fact. So, I think, again, starting early helps. If you've already missed that boat, though, and you're starting now, you can still keep those conversations going. It just takes a little more time to get comfortable with them and keep them positive.
I was just handed another, thank you, Dr. Holmes, sorry. I was handed another Twitter question, which, again, it's has to do with what you were talking about, Marnie. It's from @Trigen. How do we teach refusal skills? Biology is easy, social subtleties, not so much. Yeah, anybody want to tackle that one? She was saying that, how do we teach, like Marnie was saying, how do we teach kids to refuse as opposed to teaching them what is going to happen if they do, if they don't refuse?
I'll take a stab. I was going to take a stab, and you can follow up with me. This whole thing about abstinence-based education, I was reading through my notes here, and the governmental studies say it doesn't work. So telling kids not to have sex, basically a natural body reaction that people are going to feel. Human beings have that that's going to happen to them, especially when they get into those relationships, if you will, where they evolve. And I think we talked a little bit about earlier about we became buddies, and now we're friends, and now you kiss me on the cheek, now you kiss me on the lips. Now what happens next? And all of the other stories that go along with that. And my buddy told me he's done it, and she said they've done it. And most of it's really not true, but these kids are getting into that. So now they want to convince each other that all these things have taken place when they actually haven't. So it's a tough question to ask. How do we teach refusal skills? How do you convince an individual to go against their natural body emotions and feelings? It's challenging. It really is. So through that is a field of education what we're talking about today, educating our young people about the consequences of not refusing. The consequences may be a sexually transmitted disease. The consequences may be a baby that you have to raise for the rest of your life. And those things will change the trajectory of your life forever. Because you'll be raising a child for at least the next 17, 18 years. So refusal skills are very difficult to teach. Teaching the consequences of indulging in that, I think, is a better approach.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
To teach a child that their body is their temple. Once you learn that your body is your temple, you have control over it, and also self-esteem. We really need to work with our children as far as reaching back and making sure they all have good self-esteem. When you have good self-esteem and you feel like you have control over your body and your person, it's easier to refuse than for someone to talk you into doing something that you've been taught all these years not to do. Mm-hmm. The sex ed talk is not a new talk, and just like you guys said earlier, our children are very widely exposed to sex. So what can we do, to combat that, to make sure that they have the essential needs, for them to be able to say no? Well, we nurture them and we teach them that their body, that's the only thing that belongs to you. That's what my dad taught me. He was like, that's your body. That's the only thing that you have that actually belongs to you, that you have control over. And I think after, we instill that in our children, I think that makes a big difference.
I think there are a lot of children that have never even thought about, when is it going to be okay for me? They're just kind of caught off guard, and it happened. It just happened. I've heard that in my office so many times. Were you planning to have sex? No, it just happened. So if we can actually, again, be upfront with them and say, you know, when do you think it's going to be okay for you? Then they actually process it, they think about it, and they will do better at sticking by their decision. And actually, there's a nice research study that showed that teenagers who had made a conscious decision about when sex was going to be okay for them, on average, delayed their first sexual experience by 18 months. That's enough to get some kids out of high school, which is a great thing. So helping them make a conscious decision about when it's okay for them helps them to stick to their personal boundaries. And, you know, as a healthcare provider, I like to get them out of high school if I possibly can. That's a tough job, but if they make it past high school, they come out with a better ability they make better decisions. They're using more of their brain as they make decisions. I mean, we know that biologically, that they are better prepared to make complex decisions, and so that's a nice goal.
And all of these things go together with, as you were pointing this life experiences, whether it's, you know, when we're building up that they are building self-esteem, that they are understanding where they stand about things and what their decision-making process is, and healthy relationships. And that can lead to, okay, we can have conversations about what if you get in this situation, and, you know, how are you going to respond? Because if you haven't thought about those things, when the time comes, it's too late to think about those things.
That's right.
Good point. Just a few more stats before we wrap up. Oh, sure. I'll say this while she's walking up there. Right now, sex ed isn't a graduation requirement, and our kids only get 12.5 hours of sex education, and that's about 10% of one full course. So that's not a lot at all. What's your name?
I'm Kim.
Hi, Kim.
I'm not a mom, but how do you explain to kids who are adopted or have gotten their DNA from a sperm bank, how do you explain to them not to do it in case they accidentally meet up with a sibling or anything like that? Because it's quite common, it could be. How do you explain about genetics and stuff like that in case they carry a trait and they don't know the guy carries the trait and they could end up with a disabled child?
I think that goes back to Marnie's point about this is a biological, and Dr. Holmes' point, this is a biological issue. That's an excellent question. Dr. Holmes, you want to say anything?
You know, I think realistically, the odds of that happening are extremely rare and slim. And so, you know, if there was any suspicion that an adopted child might be meeting a sibling, you know, there are genetic tests that could be done. But again, I think that's extremely rare and not something that those children really need to worry about. Again, you know, we all have different genes, and most of the time, when they get together, they do okay. And same thing, you know, most of the time, if there's a real significant genetic problem, a lot of times people can't conceive because, you know, the DNA doesn't work, the chromosomes are irregular, abnormal. And so, again, our bodies are made in such a way that we actually are protected against a lot of those things from happening. So, genetics is pretty fascinating.
Final question, and we've only got a few minutes for this. What would you like your kids to learn in school about sex ed, and what do you expect these teachers to be teaching them? And also, do you think the teachers should have special training in order to teach comprehensive, factually accurate information to your kids about sex?
I think that not only should they learn about sex, but they should also learn about healthy relationships, healthy dating relationships. You know, because the whole focus of this conversation is sex, of course, but then we also want to instill in our children that is very important for you to just, if you're going to have sex, just have one sexual partner. You know, form healthy relationships and healthy bonds with people, because not only, like you guys said earlier, is teen pregnancy a risk, but then the risk of disease and just different things like that. And then also, you know, to establish the mindset and the self-esteem again. The self-esteem plays a large role in people who date around and see different people and everything. And so my whole thing is to teach your child how to, or for them, the teachers, in fact, to teach our children how to establish healthy dating relationships. And then with that, after you've established a healthy dating relationship, then move forward into a sexual relationship. You know, show them that it's actually like a, like a stair step, basically. Like David said earlier, you know, you meet someone, you start to like them, you kiss them, whatever, but you're only doing it with that one person if you're going to make that decision.
Also, I just have to get this in because, again, it's South Carolina. This was a Twitter question, but it kind of plays into what I asked you guys from Craven again. She said, how can we convince the fiscally conservative parents that sex ed actually will save money in the long run?
I think you already quoted the stat that South Carolina spends about $200 million a year on teen pregnancy repercussions. So, you know, preventing teen pregnancies is definitely good for our economics in South Carolina. And as a state with the 11th or 12th highest pregnancy rate in the nation, we have a lot of improvements we can do, and that's going to be better economic resources available for other things in our state, like education.
Yeah, just show them the statistics, you know, educate them.
Yes.
The proof is in the pudding, basically.
Yes, it is. Would any of you guys like to say anything else before we wrap up or add anything? Okay. Mr. Mitchell?
Just my last thoughts, and I think it kind of lent to the facts about economics. I'm in the employment industry, and when you look at individuals who have you know, made mistakes or got in a situation where they became teen moms, that delayed their process in life. Now, some teen mothers go on to finish high school, and some go on to finish college. But some find it very, very difficult in order to not only raise a child, probably a single mom, raised by another single mom. They're going through that experience. And to enter the workforce is a big challenge. You start talking about the economics of it. The Department of Social Services is only going to provide you so much. You're going to have to find a job. You only have about 2 years on what people consider welfare, family self-sufficiency. This is the legal term for it. It's not welfare, it's family self-sufficiency. I hate when I hear the term welfare. But helping young people understand that trying to go into a job situation, and I'll tell this quick story of a young lady who was 16 years old. She was 18 when she came in my office, but she had already had a 2-year-old, and she was pregnant at 18 in the office, 2 months away from delivery date, wanting a full-time job. Now, certainly we don't discriminate, and we give her opportunity, but how many employers will give that person an opportunity knowing that not only is she going to be delivering in 2 months, now we have another factor here of liability for insurance and things of that nature. So economically, it impacts families. When young people make these decisions, it just changes your whole trajectory on your life and what you were planning on doing. You could have been an honor student ready to go off to college. Now that is delayed because now I have a 1-month-old that I'm trying to raise at 18 years old, and I should have been a freshman at Clemson University. So those are the economic impacts. How do you take care of the child once it's here?
I think the dropout rate too, I mean, it's on one of the statistics that you got tonight, but 40% of teen moms finish high school, and less than 2% of teen mothers ever finish college by the age of 30. So, I mean, that gives them plenty of time, but only 2% actually go on to graduate from college. So it definitely impacts our workforce and our economics.
And I think it's an education process for our community to understand, because I think a lot of people want to say, okay, well, teen pregnancy, that's not an issue I want to be involved in, or STD prevention and things like that. But when you do get down to the numbers of it, we as taxpayers pay on the front end or the back. So I think it would be, you know, wise of us as a community to get around this issue up front, and how much that can change generations to come if we can make an impact on that.
Point. Well, that's it. I'd like to thank TellThem.SouthCarolina.org for hosting this for the first forum, first of many, and the New Morning Foundation for their report and bringing all this good information to light. And of course, I'd like to thank our phenomenal panelists. That went way better than I thought it was going to go. Good job, you guys. Dr. Holmes, Ms. Fant, Ms. Black, Mr. Mitchell, thank you so much. And thank you, audience. Thank you for attending. And like I said, we got to keep talking about this. It's important. Have a good evening.